Hi class, in this lecture we're going to look at abnormal psychology and talk a little bit about mental disorders. So when it comes to psychology overall, we know that that the goals are to explain, describe, control, and predict behavior. So it's important that we know that so that we have these definitions for what we consider normal behavior and abnormal behavior. And when it comes to talking about abnormal behavior, the lines get a little blurry there, okay? So what is normal? Let's think about that for a couple minutes. What is behavior that we consider to be normal? We'll go with some basic ones. Not being naked in public, right? Wearing clothes, that is considered a normal behavior. Ah, there we go. I couldn't see myself, it was a little dark there. That is a normal behavior. Proper hygiene, so bathing, brushing your teeth, brushing your hair, you know, just general maintenance of your body is considered normal behavior. It's considered normal behavior to not talk to yourself. I know though, there's probably a lot of us, we do have those little conversations with yourself. They say you're crazy when you answer yourself. So what happens when you argue with yourself? I guess you're really over the deep end, huh? So, but generally, you know, talking to yourself loudly, yelling and screaming and cussing at people, you know, those are generally considered not acceptable behaviors, right? I kind of jumped ahead in our lecture, but that's all right. But, you know, what we define as normal, you know, then the opposite side of that is what we define as abnormal behavior. And so really, when it comes to normal behavior, we're looking at behavior that allows us to function in society as a group. So it's behavior that keeps society functioning, and that keeps us, you know, working together in those meaningful and positive and productive ways, right? And so when it comes to normal behavior, it does vary with culture. So, all cultures are built upon a system of social conduct. So really basically what that means is that all cultures have specific ways of how we're supposed to engage each other when we're out in public, and then, you know, kind of in our private life too. And so, no matter what culture you look at, there are always three underlying rules, and that's reciprocity, gender roles, and division of labor. And so, reciprocity, that is the system of exchange. You know, that's the give and take that we need to survive as human beings, right? That we need to survive in society. And gender roles, the way cultures go about defining their gender roles and kind of acting out those gender roles, that is going to vary. However, you know, there always seems to be masculine type roles and kind of feminine type roles, right? And think of it like archetypes. You know, we have those different archetypes, and we have that masculine and feminine archetype. So we see that kind of reflective in the way we set up our cultures too. And then lastly, division of labor. And basically what that means is that, you know, everybody needs a job and everybody needs to be working and contributing to society, right? And then, like I said, so kind of when we go against those things is when we start to see that abnormal behavior, because, you know, it's deviating from those successful ways that we engage with each other. So then that gets us to what is abnormal behavior, and I kind of already noted those as we were talking about normal behavior. So being naked in public, that would be abnormal. You know, poor hygiene, that would be abnormal. You know, loudly talking to yourself, that's kind of abnormal behavior. You know, very disturbed and agitated behavior in society, we kind of consider that abnormal behavior, right? So when we're looking at abnormal psychology, we see that we still have those same goals as psychology overall. It's just we're applying it to the context of mental disorder. So we're looking at what happens when our brains get sick. That's basically a mental illness, a mental a disorder. It simply means that the brain is sick. And just like any other part of the body that can get sick, it means that it can get better too, right? So with abnormal psychology, psychopathology, we're looking at psychopathology of mental disorders. So basically what that means is psychopathology is just the study of those mental disorders. You know, what are those symptoms? What are those causes? In abnormal psychology, those causes, we call it the etiology. We're looking at that, you know, the root of the problem that is causing the distress. And basically, when it comes to defining a mental disorder, mental illness, we sometimes think that those are different things, and really they're the same. It's just kind of different contexts of how we use those. Remember, when we're looking at psychology, when studying human behavior, we're looking at that mind-body connection. And that's kind of the differences in disorders and illnesses. So with a mental illness, those are those disorders that are more kind of internal and more focused on that mind aspect of our behaviors, whereas when we say a disorder, we're looking more at those overt, you know, those outward behaviors that we're expressing. So something like depression would be an illness because it's an internal disorder. I know it's hard to not use that word, you know, but it's illness because it's inside. It's mostly inside, you know. And then something like social conduct disorder, which is something common we see in childhood, especially among adolescent boys, and that's just, you know, blatant disregard for authority, very argumentative and destructive types behavior. So, you know, we see that you know, the brain's sick, and we see that being manifested then in those kind of those socially rebellious type ways, and, you know, in very extreme types of rebellion. So that's just the difference there between disorder and illness there. So when it comes to psychopathology, abnormal psychology, we are looking at, you know, to look at abnormal behaviors. We really have a wide spectrum of behaviors we're looking at. So things, you know, violent, suicidal, you know, those extreme behaviors to like less sensationalized, and it's not that I discredit these next set of disorders that I have here, because really they're more prevalent. The majority of mental disorders are depression, anxiety, PTSD. That's actually, PTSD is a disorder that we see becoming more prevalent among inner city kids, because, you know, they have such a toxic and stressful environment. You know, these are those kids that live in those really poor areas that are just, you know, wrought with gang violence and drug abuse, and you know, that really causes mental distress. And so that is really, if we really want to get into it and say what is a mental disorder, what is mental illness, it is behaviors, thoughts, emotions that are so severe, so debilitating, just, you know, they inhibit you so much that you can't do those normal daily functionings, even to the point of, you know, just those basic things like getting up and just, you know, being able to put your clothes on or brush your teeth. You know, sometimes they can be so extreme, people, you know, can't even do that. We see that with the most extreme type of schizophrenia, because there actually are 5 different types of schizophrenia. It's disorganized, I think I'm saying it wrong there. Yeah, disorganized schizophrenia there. Alright, so when we're looking at, like I said, psychopathology, you know, we're really looking at that etiology, what are those symptoms, and then how do we get treatment for these disorders, because like I said, it just means that the brain is sick. Alright, so when it comes to studying behavior and looking at what we consider abnormal and normal behavior, we do have to take those cultural and social political contexts into consideration. And so just look around at these pictures that I have on the screen here, and if you were to look at these people, whom would you define as normal? Looks like they have normal behaviors. And whom do you think has abnormal behaviors? And for the most part, students always go immediately to the guy on the top left with all the piercings and the facial tattoos there. And that one is a little trick. That actually is a guy who has a body dysmorphic disorder. But in many cultures, it is very acceptable. It's a part of normal behavior to have, you know, elaborate tattooing and elaborate kind of body art, piercing, scarification, things of that nature, which is the example in the girl underneath him. I believe, I can't ever remember the culture, but it's somewhere down in Southeast Asia. And then there at the very bottom, I've just got a group of just kind of typical, normal Americans there. And even in that, it's kind of hard to define and say, you know, are those people really normal? We don't really know what's going on in any of those people's heads, right? Hang on, guys. Max! We don't know what's going on in any of those people's heads. That's the thing. Famous serial killer Ted Bundy. I know he's all the rage right now because of that new series or something. But, you know, people were very shocked when they found out the heinous things that he had done, because everyone was like, oh, he's such a great, nice guy. He's positive, contributing member of society. What do you mean Ted did that? So, you know, we can't. So my point is that, you know, when it comes to mental illness and mental disorders, we do kind of associate, you know, we have stereotypes and prejudice and discrimination associated with that. And we just have to remember, you know, what really is normal and abnormal. And, you know, it comes down to that right there, you know, that if you're, you know, disrupting society, you're harming others, you know, that's, you know, red light for abnormal behavior, right? And, and then over here on the right side, I have some different cultural groups. And I usually take this in a religious context, because sometimes when it comes to stereotyping people based on their appearances, you know, we have stereotypes, right? And so if you look at those groups, whom would you consider Muslim? Whom would you consider Christian? And so when I do this lecture live in class, everybody always says that top picture is, you know, they're Muslim because the women are wearing the head covering. And then they also think that they actually think both of those pictures are Islamic groups there. And they're not. They are actually Arabic culture. So they're just actually one... in the middle there, I think, is not South Sudan, but Northern Sudan, so more African culture there. But the ones on top are more Arabic, yeah, Arab. That's the word I was looking for, or Arab culture. I just can't remember what specific nation there. But so that's kind of a fallacy that just, you know, the women who are Muslim wear the head covers. I'm going to butcher it if I say the hijab. I think something like that is how you say it. But and that's just kind of an Arabic thing, you know. It sounds so stupid saying that, guys. I'm so sorry. But that's just something, my point is that's just something that Middle Eastern cultures do. That's just a way that they dress. And then, you know, once again, that picture there in the middle, that group of men, that's some kind of Christian ceremony. It has to do with like a Stations of the Cross type thing, if you guys know anything about that. And then lastly, there on the bottom, I've got that great group of different people, and I'm sure you guys might hopefully recognize a lot of the people in that picture. You see there's Dave Chappelle, I've got Jermaine Jackson, Cassius Clay there, Muhammad Ali. I've got, who's that? Malcolm X. Got some older people from like the 19th and 18th century. And when looking at all those different faces in that last picture, what do you think all of those people have in common? They are all Muslim. You know, yes, they practice the Islamic faith there. And so once again, we just see that, you know, we can't judge people just solely based on their appearances, okay? You know, that's why stereotyping is wrong. And then when it comes down to it, you know, in many ways, we can't judge people based on some of the behaviors that they do, okay? So once again, put it in context. You know, I'm talking about, you know, any behavior that harms somebody, that's disruptive to society, you know, that is wrong. You know, that's generally deemed as wrong, right? So what I'm saying is not being judging behavior, is that sometimes, you know, different cultures have different ways of behaving. You know, maybe they have different hand gestures for things that they say, or they have different ways that they go about practicing their belief system. And that doesn't mean that those people have mental illnesses. It doesn't mean those cultures are all crazy, right? No. It simply means that they just, they're expressing how to be human in a different way. And that's okay. You know, it's okay to have those unique ways, because that's really what different means. It just means that we're unique and individual. And we all have that special gift to give to society. So that's why we're interested in abnormal behaviors, because, you know, we're looking to change those into something positive and productive, because it's all about helping everybody find their gift, right? So, Thomas Sazaz, I'm pretty sure is how you say his name. He was a psychologist that believed that mental illness was really just a myth to control and change people's behaviors. And the main reason he thought that was based on these 3 points I have here. And it's because, you know, something that is just different behavior doesn't necessarily mean that somebody has a mental illness. It just means, you know, that they have different cultural behaviors. Just because people have different belief systems that we might deem weird or unusual, you know, it doesn't mean that those are wrong and indicate an illness. And then he believed that why mental illness was a myth, because it really wasn't something that was wrong with individuals. It was rather a reflection of larger society. And that is actually something that Freud talks a little bit about, civilization and its discontent. That is something that in sociology we talk about. Emil Durkheim and kind of his ideas on suicide. But I will save that for another lecture there. So, like I said, I've already explained this to you guys. So when it comes to mental disorder and mental illness, you know, we note those, you know, it's a contextual thing, you know. So one side is the mind part of it, and then the other side is the behavioral part of it. So that disorder and you know, they relate to each other. So, you know, the disorder is those outward behaviors, illness is those inner thought patterns, those emotions, right? And so you know, it's kind of the power of thought. You know, if we think negatively, we kind of act negatively, kind of negative things happen. When we can change our thoughts to more positive and productive things, we should, you know, exhibit more positive and productive behaviors. And, you know, life kind of shows us more positive and productive things. And that's a big part of cognitive behavioral therapy, and that's kind of the rage right now with a lot of mental health and psychological practices there. So when it comes to abnormal psychology, you know, we're looking at mental health care professionals, and you know, they focus specifically on mental disorders, mental illness, improving just overall mental health and well-being there. And of course, a big way that we go about defining behaviors and what is normal and abnormal is just, you know, asking questions, observing the behaviors, and then that's how you get a psychodiagnosis. And pretty much that's just the assessment of, you know, assessment of what they see going on based on how you're acting, kind of how you look, how you answer those questions. And then, you know, they kind of make inferences, kind of like, well, based on this and my education and what I know about mental disorders, I think maybe this person might, you know, be suffering from this, right? Or this type of disorder. And so, you know, once again, that etiology there, you know, that is the most important thing, looking at those causes, right? And we know for Freud that the etiology is always going to be something that's we've repressed down in our unconscious mind there, right? And so when it comes to looking at those possible causes, there is a bit of predicting behavior that goes along with that. And just like we said, you know, there's so many different ways of being human that in the past, in defining abnormal behavior, and psychology has been a little bit on the kind of discriminatory and stereotypical and prejudiced side of that. And so just like that example I have there, so, you know, in psychology, we would say that just because a man is, say, a man is young and black, then therefore that means that he is more prone to criminal behavior. And we know that that's not true. I mean, yes, we may look at statistics and say, oh, well, there are more Latino and black men who are in jail, and yes, that is true, but it's not for why we think, and it doesn't necessarily mean that all young black men are going to go to jail. You know, there's a lot going on when we look at those statistics, and then just the criminal justice system in general, that would be like 3 lectures long if we were to get into that. So my point is that, you know, we can't stereotype and make those types of predictions about people, you know, based on those very base physical traits there. Sorry guys, my allergies are acting up. Based on those physical traits. And if we look around, we see that, you know, other groups are prone to violent criminal behavior. Lochner, I don't know if you guys remember him, but he was the guy that shot the Arizona representative there, the lady, Giffords. You guys remember that from a few years ago? A lot of these mass shootings we've had recently seem to be, you know, perpetuated by the white male population. So I would say that there's probably something going on with that group that we probably need to be looking at the mental health and well-being of all groups, I guess is what I'm trying to say there, you know. And once again, the thing about a mental illness is it just means the brain gets sick. The brain can get better, and we know that a lot of the behaviors we have as human beings, that many of them are socially conditioned, right? That's that nurture side of the nature-nurture debate. And so, you know, we are conditioned to behave in those socially acceptable ways, and so that means that our behaviors, they're learned and they're trainable. So, you know, that means that we can relearn. So, you know, once again, cognitive behavioral therapy, that's kind of a big thing about of that. Even psychoanalysis is, you know, retraining our thought processes and you know, our emotional reactions to things, and you know, retraining those behaviors. And it's all in the context of, you know, retraining, reconditioning somebody so that they are, you know, are displaying more of those self-serving behaviors, you know, those positive and productive things that are helping them along their path of self-actualization, right? Alright, so there are some different types of mental health professionals. I will include that handout with you guys in the for you guys in the announcement. So if you want to look over those, because maybe you've now that you're in psychology, you're a little interested in this field, so maybe that's something you might want to go into. Maybe you are already a nursing student in healthcare, and you think that you might want to, you know, specialize in psychiatric nursing. So I'll include that so you guys can look over those requirements. And just like I said, so when it comes to a mental disorder, we note it as, you know, it's got to be so dysfunctional, so disturbing that person, you know, has trouble just functioning in society. You know, it has to cause significant distress or difficulty. And then once again, it's not just a cultural response to a common stressor or something that has to do with political or religious beliefs. A good example is there was this case one time of this Hispanic woman who had her son die. The way the article went, the woman's son died, and so she for some reason or another, she ended up in the hospital, and based on her responses of how she was grieving over her dead son, they diagnosed her with schizophrenia. and put her on all sorts of schizophrenia medication, and come to find out the woman did not have any mental illness whatsoever. It was her culture, that the way she responded to talking to grieving for her dead son involved her, still talking to him, involved her thinking she still hears him talk to her, and that is pretty common for a lot of different cultures around the world. They do, have those beliefs because they feel like, those are our ancestors, they're part of us, your relatives are part of you, and they're still here to guide us along in this life, kind of help prepare us for those other lives, right? And so, because that hospital didn't catch that, they kind of got sued, and big ordeal for those guys, right? So, so once again, it's really important that, we just don't base our judgments, we shouldn't judge, period, but, based our judgments of other people on, kind of just those basic raw level, basically I'm saying face value, don't take people for face value, because, that's how then, we have those negative engagements, and we kind of, get those negative type things that we think about each other, right? So it's important to, to stay open and always have that kind of cultural context when it comes to dealing with behaviors that may be different from your own. And then, of course, when it comes to those really extremely disturbing behaviors, you have to be, very prepared. That's why when it comes to mental health care, you do have to, in order to actually get to the point of practicing, it does take a lot of education, a lot of man hours put in, and working in psychiatric hospitals, so that, you are experiencing the plethora of different abnormal behaviors that are out there. So, you're able to make those psychodiagnoses and able to get those right. All right. So basically, with psychology there, like I said, a lot of education, then you got to put a lot of legwork in, and then you have you have to apply to get a license, and then you have to take tests for that, and then every year you have to do professional development. So, it's always something that, just like anything else in life, it's a process where you're always working and growing, right? So that you're always as best as you can be at it. So, when it comes to the requirements for different states, they kind of differ there, but all states abide by the ethical code set forth by the APA, that is the American Psychological Association, that was established there by G. Stanley Hall. And so in Tennessee, just because I live here, and most of the times when I do this lecture live, it's with nurses, that my nursing classes here in Tennessee, and they're always interested in the process of Tennessee. Like I said, it kind of varies. And the way you find is you would just go to your state's board. There's going to be some kind of psychology association, a psychology examiner board that is specific to your state. And usually if you just go to your state's, main government website and type in something like psychology association, it should pull that information up for you. And then under there, you'll find what all their ethical codes are, because even those ethical codes differ from state to state, but like I said, everybody kind of defers back to the APA's ethical codes there. And then when it comes to psychology, I want to note that not all psychologists provide therapy or diagnoses, right? Psychologists can do a plethora of jobs. There are some that are just research oriented. There are some that actually do therapy, so they provide that counseling. There are some who are like me, or more into just the education aspect of it. And then we actually have psychologists and anthropologists, the people who study human behavior, so people in social sciences that work for public or private organizations, just kind of analyzing, predicting, describing, controlling behaviors. So big companies, Walmart, McDonald's, Chipotle, you name it, Calvin Klein, everybody at their head corporate office has some group of psychologists, anthropologists that have some say in how those stores are designed. They have a say in the lighting and the color schemes, because it's all about being able to predict the behavior to get us to what? Buy their stuff, want to come back to their store, get their product. And, advertising is a really, really big on psychology, and that's because of, Watson. He's kind of the one who started that with advertising there. And then, of course, with Skinner, once we get to B.F. Skinner, we start seeing a lot of operant conditioning ideas come into society there, right? Alright, so pretty much 1 in 4 people have a mental illness, and we say something like 25% of Americans over the age of 18 have suffered some type of disorder in their life. And when it comes to that criteria we have for defining mental disorders, we have, it's kind of like the Psychology Bible. It's called the DSM, and it's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And we are on the 5th, so it's the DSM-5 is what we use right now. And I say Bible because things like, it's got a lot of hefty information packed inside it, and kind of has some controversy too. Alright, so when it comes to looking at different mental disorders, we actually group them into categories based on those symptoms. So here are 6 of the most common categories of disorders, and then that 7th one is kind of a little side one that I want to talk about that's interesting. So we have substance use disorder, anxiety disorders, affective disorders, and affective, that is that's just another way of saying mood disorders. It means it affective, it affects us inside. So emotional types of things. So yeah, mood affective disorders. And then, like I said, we have 5 different types of schizophrenia. We have antisocial personality disorder. In the past we called psychopaths, but that has actually changed with the DSM-5, and it is now antisocial personality disorder. So we don't, the term psychopath is kind of outdated now. And then there are cognitive disorders. So that would be, things when we have a actual trauma to the brain, or kind of even nervous system there. And then eating disorders is another category. Sexual dysfunction disorders is another category. And that is something that includes women and men too. Gaming disorders, gambling, online gaming disorder is actually one. Europe has a DSM. They have their own version of that they use, and they have already added online gaming disorder in that. And then we look into other things too. So they're trying to look at maybe like addiction to online porn, like actually including that in the DSM-5 as a mental disorder. Addiction to online gaming. Oh, I just said that one. I'm sorry. I meant addiction to online gambling is what I meant to say there. And so this is not the actual comprehensive list. It's just this list of categories I have are just the most prevalent categories there. Alright, so lastly there I have medical student syndrome, or you might have heard it called psychology student syndrome. And pretty much what it is, it's a form of hypochondriasis. And so basically what happens is that studying medicine, statistics show that medical students in medical schools and nursing fields especially are the most stressed out of anybody when it comes to education. And so because of all that stress and all that information they have to learn, sometimes we get a little hypochondriac when we start reading about these different diseases. And when it comes to psychology, once we start learning about these different types of mental disorders, especially especially the personality disorders, we kind of get we get a little bit of that medical student syndrome and start to think, oh gosh, yeah, that's me. That describes me. That's me. And you got to think about it. Even though there are many different ways to be human, we all have every single one of those ways to be inside of ourselves. So yes, when we look at these symptoms and symptoms for some of these disorders, we will see things that we do in there. And so remember, when the key to it being those behaviors being disorderly comes in with duration. And once again, just the disability, how debilitating is it to you? So when you have a behavior, or when you have behavior that is, distressing you, debilitating you, causing you not to function correctly, and it starts, prolonged, it becomes a pattern, then, that's when hey, wait, you got to stop and figure out what's going on there, right? So anyway, once again, just medical student syndrome, that's just kind of a little fun one to throw in there. And like I said, especially when we get to look at personality and psychology classes, we all tend to want to self-diagnose and get a little bit of that syndrome going on there. So like I said, so those are just some of the categories of mental disorders. And when it comes down to looking at breaking down all the disorders specifically, we have something like at least 250. Hey, note it. And just what I said, the diagnostic and statistical manual there. And let's see. I'm pretty sure I've already said all of this. I just want to make sure of that. So yeah, so 250 disorders, and then like I've mentioned, there are some other ones. And then once again, just another note on stigmas and stereotypes associated with mental illness. And most of the time they're those negative stereotypes. So we think that the most common ones associated with mental illness are that they're dangerous, they're violent, they're unpredictable, they're incompetent, or they're just they don't have any responsibility for his or her actions, any moral codes. And that's just oftentimes it's not true. And I know it's hard to think that way because media sensationalizes some of these more severe stories of abnormal behavior. My animals, dogs chasing the goats back here. Always something crazy going on here. And so, once again, that's why I say, most mental disorders, they're not those extreme violent behaviors. It's not Ted Bundy. It's not these people out mass shooting. Those actually are, they're just not as common. It's like I said, it's more common that these stress-related disorders, that cause us dysfunction. And those are something that can affect any one of us. Maxie! Stop chasing the goats! Alright guys, let's move them right along here. So like I said, so just to note that, when it comes to mental disorders, what we define as abnormal and normal, there is we've got to and take that kind of on a case-by-case basis, because when it comes to actually defining, psychodiagnosing what is a mental disorder, none of us are qualified to do that until you get that that license degree. So it's just, prejudice, discrimination, stereotyping, they're never a good thing in any context, because what does that do? That hinders us, that hinders other people's ability to be successful in life, that hinders all of our ability to self-actualize, and it hinders our ability of self-efficacy. And pretty much that's just how much we believe in ourselves. And so, once again, a lot of, we do see a lot of disorders in the United States, and it's okay. There's, if you have a mental disorder, mental illness, that doesn't mean that you're crazy or a bad person. Once again, most of the time it just has something to do with stress. Those are our most common types of disorder. So in wrapping up, just say it's just important to note that we're all unique individuals. Any one of our brains can get sick at any time, based on the stress that we have in our life. And so, it's more important that we have that compassion, respect, and understanding for each other as human beings, because that's how we're all able to learn and grow and reach our, and get to those top tiers of our path to self-actualization. And it is something that we have to do together. So, thanks, guys.